Should a country remain silent when the navy of another nation escorts boats loaded with drugs through international waters? Before we continue, subscribe if you believe the United States cannot ignore a naval force acting as a cartel's protective shield. What you're about to see is neither a misunderstanding nor an isolated case. It is clear footage of Venezuelan warships accompanying illicit cargo with military precision. For some, it is a sign of state-level complicity. For others, a spark that could escalate into a major crisis. Watch until the end and decide for yourself what this encounter in the Caribbean truly represents. At 2:15 inches the afternoon, roughly 120 nautical miles off the Venezuelan coast, a U.S. Coast Guard MQ-9 Reaper detected an unusual formation moving steadily across the Caribbean. 4 high-speed boats, aligned as if following a coordinated pattern, carried tightly wrapped plastic bundles arranged neatly on their decks. But it wasn't the drugs that made the drone operator call for immediate verification. The alarming detail was the presence of 2 Venezuelan naval patrol ships, PO-13 and PO-15, sailing beside the convoy as if escorting it. The 4K live feed displayed a scene that should never occur. Official military vessels accompanying traffickers through international waters. The channel Military Power urges viewers to subscribe, because this was not routine smuggling, this was a national navy, acting as protection for criminal networks. PO-13 and PO-15 were not lost, confused, or misdirected. Their positions were exact and deliberate. They kept the same pace as the 4 boats, holding rear diagonal positions, similar to a security detail guarding a high-profile convoy. Nothing about their behavior was subtle. Gun turrets were uncovered. The 76mm naval cannons loosely pointed forward. Radar systems spun continuously scanning for threats, and 50 caliber machine guns remained mounted and ready. This was a full military escort. There was no room for benign interpretations. For the crew aboard USCGC, James watching the feed in their operations room, the situation shifted quickly from unusual to deeply alarming. These were not misidentified civilian vessels. The hull numbers matched perfectly. PO-13 and PO-15 were verified Venezuelan Navy assets listed in public defense registries. Flags waved clearly. Hull colors and equipment configurations matched, and uniforms were unmistakable. They were official warships, and instead of stopping the traffickers, they were protecting them. The cargo, large rectangular packages wrapped in thick plastic, remained fully visible. U.S. personnel reacted with the discipline they had rehearsed for months, though the protocol they trained for no longer applied. The shipment, later estimated at over $200 million, was headed for an offshore handoff before entering the U.S. market. But its value wasn't what made the moment historic. What mattered was who was guarding it. The drone kept its signal stable. Every maneuver and speed adjustment was recorded. On the bridge of the James, officers with decades of experience struggled to process what they were witnessing. International law outlines smuggling, jurisdiction, and legitimate use of force, but it contains no guidance for a situation where a nation's navy functions as the armed wing of a cartel. Intervention was impossible. The U.S. cutter was more than 50 miles away and needed 90 minutes to reach the area. But even then, it couldn't act. Any attempt to intercept the Venezuelan ships would be considered hostile. PO-13 and PO-15 carried anti-air systems, surface-to-surface missiles, and radar-guided fire control. Firing without being attacked first would violate international law. The James had strict orders: do not engage unless fired upon. Observe, document, confirm identity and intent. And here, the intent was unmistakable. Then something changed. One of the boats began emitting smoke. Its engines faltered, slowing it down. The other 3 continued without hesitation, standard protocol among traffickers. If one vessel fails, it's abandoned to preserve the main cargo. But PO-15 broke formation. It slowed down, altered course, and moved directly toward the disabled boat. What followed would be forever archived in Coast Guard records. PO-15 positioned itself beside the damaged vessel. Uniformed sailors, wearing standard naval gear with visible Venezuelan insignias, stepped onto the deck. Calmly and without haste, they began transferring the cargo. Nearly 2 tons of drugs moved onto the warship in under 20 minutes. The drone recorded every bundle, every movement in high detail. There was no attempt to conceal the operation. It was routine, almost mechanical. No distress calls were made, no request for assistance. This was logistics, not rescue. Once finished, PO-15 increased speed and rejoined the convoy, leaving the disabled boat adrift, abandoned after completing its role. At that moment, the Venezuelan vessel ceased to be a patrol ship. It became a state-protected transport vessel carrying illegal cargo. On the James, disbelief gave way to restraint. Officers knew legal boundaries had been crossed, but so had operational ones. They could not pursue vessels into Venezuelan territorial waters. They could not fire preemptively. All they could do was watch, and they did. PO-15 remained under constant surveillance. What happened next escalated the scenario further. After separating from the convoy, the Venezuelan ship dimmed its running lights and changed course toward the southeast, becoming a ghost on open water. Satellite imagery later confirmed its destination, the maritime boundary near Trinidad and Tobago. Shortly before midnight, the ship stopped 20 nautical miles off the coast. Engines idle, lights off, radar active, it waited in silence. 30 minutes later, 4 fast boats departed Trinidad, heading directly toward PO-15. Small but agile, they approached with purpose. The following operation unfolded quietly. No flares, no open radio communication, just vessel-to-vessel maneuvering in darkness. The smaller boats surrounded PO-15, and another transfer began. Meanwhile, a remote drone operator adjusted calculations, humidity, wind, air density. The missile needed perfect conditions. A Hellfire launched, striking with precision. In seconds, the target became a column of water and metal. 6 targets, 12 minutes. The evidence was undeniable. A national navy had transported drugs and delivered them to foreign traffickers. Meanwhile, in Washington, another mission had been underway. The DEA had spent over a year infiltrating the network. Their undercover agent, known only as Neptuno, penetrated the naval wing of the Venezuelan trafficking corridor. After 18 months, he accessed internal meetings, communications, and financial records. At the top of the operation was Admiral Ernesto Sadeño Tobar, commander of the Bolivarian Navy, in direct contact with Ismael Zambada, El Mayo, a key Sinaloa cartel leader. A chain of 47 officers operated beneath him, each in charge of a maritime zone, with assigned duties, schedules, and payment structures. Reports showed a tariff system: 10% of shipment value for basic escort, 15% with tactical navigation data, 20% for transport aboard naval ships, and up to 30% for high-risk or submarine missions. This was not isolated corruption, it was an organized system. The Navy functioned like a private contractor disguised as a military force. The impact of the operation did not end in the Caribbean. Its consequences soon reached U.S. territory in tangible and measurable ways. Hospitals across several states began reporting a sharp increase in overdose cases linked to an unusually potent chemical composition. Toxicology results revealed that the substances involved shared the same forensic markers previously identified in shipments connected to PO-15's activities at sea. For investigators, this chemical match was a direct indication that narcotics moved under the protection of Venezuelan naval units had successfully entered the U.S. market, intensifying public health risks and overwhelming local emergency services. As the situation escalated, Washington sought formal clarification through diplomatic channels. Requests for explanations were delivered with urgency, outlining concerns about the apparent participation of state assets in international trafficking. Caracas, however, offered no immediate answer. Instead of cooperation or denial, silence prevailed, followed, unexpectedly, by an increase in maritime activity. Within days, new aerial and satellite footage revealed another Venezuelan patrol vessel, PO-3, performing a similar transfer operation under the cover of night, reinforcing suspicions that these actions were systematic rather than isolated incidents. In response, legal institutions in the United States initiated a series of measures. Federal prosecutors issued dozens of sealed indictments aimed not only at cartel operatives, but also at members of the Venezuelan military structure believed to be involved. One of the most significant breakthroughs occurred when Captain Ricardo Marquez, a high-ranking naval officer described in multiple intelligence reports, was detained in the Dominican Republic during a private trip. Coordinated efforts between local authorities and U.S. Marshals led to his swift extradition to Miami, where he now faces charges related to narco-terrorism, conspiracy, and transnational criminal activity. What originally appeared to be a singular irregularity, observed through surveillance, evolved into evidence of a deeper and more organized collaboration between a national navy and criminal networks. This raises a critical question that remains unanswered. How long can such a structure operate without prompting a broader regional or international response? The implications extend far beyond one incident. They point to a challenge that may soon require decisions far more consequential than diplomatic notes or courtroom proceedings. And with this final footage, one truth remains. What happened in the Caribbean was no accident. A national navy escorted tons of drugs as if it were a legitimate mission. The evidence is clear, waiting for consequences that have not yet come. The real question is not what occurred, but how long it can be ignored. Should the United States treat this as a simple maritime violation or as a threat demanding action? You decide. Are we witnessing extreme corruption or the quiet beginning of a larger conflict? Thank you for watching. Share your thoughts and subscribe to follow this case because what comes next may change everything.